Right now, Tropical Storm Bret has been strengthening over the past several hours. Taking a look at the current water vapor imagery, we do see that there's a lot more convective activity surrounding the center of circulation. Right now, its maximum sustained wind speed is right around 65 miles per hour, with its central millibar pressure hovering around 1,000 millibars, and it's moving west-northwest at around 15 miles per hour, which is slightly above average when it comes to a tropical cyclone moving through the main development region. And as you can see, there isn't a lot of dry air. We do have a small area of dry air just to the north of it, but it isn't necessarily enough to hinder the convective activity that's going on over this storm right now. And we don't see that there's a lot of wind shear. There is stronger wind shear on the northern side, where we clearly do see the outflow clouds are moving towards the northeast, but isn't enough to stop this storm from being in a process where it's undergoing intensification. And I wouldn't rule out the possibility this still could develop potentially into a low-end hurricane, but the most likely scenario is that this will remain a strong tropical storm before it passes just to the west of Lesser Antilles and does encounter more unfavorable conditions for intensification. The other disturbance we're keeping an eye on is Invest 93L, which likely will become at least a tropical depression within the next 48 hours and likely will eventually become Tropical Storm Cindy in the very near future. And here's how much convection there is surrounding the center of circulation. There isn't a ton. We do see it's only a small area of convective activity. However, this could be enough for the pressure to lower along the surface and the wind speed to increase enough for this to be considered a tropical storm in the very near future. And we do see that the conditions aren't very unfavorable either. We do see that the wind shear is a little bit stronger on the northern side of this storm, but not strong enough to stop this convective activity from occurring. So as a result, we're most likely going to see this develop into a tropical storm. Here's the current wind shear map for over these two storms, and we do see that the upper level winds aren't very strong over either of these storms. They're hovering around light to moderate amount of upper level winds, where the upper level winds are hovering around 15 to 20 knots, which will at least hinder its development just a little bit. It might definitely ruin the organization of this storm, as well as the vertical alignment of the storm between the upper levels and the lower levels of the atmosphere. But I wouldn't say it'll be enough to the point where it's gonna completely kill off these two storms until possibly later, when they move a little bit further westward and conditions do become a little bit more unfavorable and the center circulation moves a little bit too fast for the upper level moisture to keep up, which is expected to be the primary reason why these two storms are expected to dissipate. They're just moving a little bit too fast to maintain a well-organized area of energy and convection. And here's a percent chance that the National Hurricane Center is giving Invest 93L of developing. We do see that it's a high 80% chance it has risen compared to yesterday that we're going to see tropical cyclone formation, and a high 90% over the next 7 days. So this will, at the very least, most likely develop into a tropical depression as the conditions seem conducive enough. The sea surface temperatures are warmer than 80 degrees. So of course, the ocean will be there to support for enough convective activity, with the sea surface temperatures a lot warmer, making the air molecules move a lot more to hold a lot more water vapor and to create more convection. And overall, there isn't a ton of wind shear or dry air that's going to hinder Invest 93L, at least for now. So this likely will become a tropical depression. So here's what the latest run of the GFS model is stating when it comes to these two storms. So it's not much different than yesterday. The GFS model expects a very similar track compared to yesterday's run for both of these two disturbances, as well as very similar strengths as these storms continue to head further westward. Moving forward with Tropical Storm Bret, the GFS model does expect a slight amount of intensification before it impacts the Lesser Antilles. And for the Lesser Antilles, it's likely that you will experience tropical storm force conditions. And if this does develop into a hurricane, which isn't out of the realm of possibilities, you could maybe experience some hurricane force wind gusts in the very localized areas somewhere around the Lesser Antilles. So you definitely want to pay very close attention to that. And most of the weather will be on the eastern side of this storm because, like I've been saying in my previous videos, the storm will be very asymmetrical as it continues ahead further westward. There's going to be plenty of dry air on the western side. So just because the first half of the storm might not be very impactful does not mean that it'll stay the same for the second half in the Lesser Antilles, because all the moisture and the strongest of the winds will be located on the eastern side where all the convective activity is going on. And the reason why the storm is asymmetrical because like I said in my previous videos, again, the lower level winds are just moving a little bit too fast for the upper level moisture to keep up where all the convection is located, where we do see that the lower level center is moving a bit too fast for the moisture, so it becomes asymmetrical due to that. And since the storm is asymmetrical, the energy is more spread out and it's unevenly spaced to the point where it can't really enhance its wind speed or the amount of convection, since it's a lot more spread out. There's a lot more of a dispersion when it comes to the air molecules spiraling around the low pressure system, and there's a lot more stable air on the western side as a result, creating more of a temperature inversion, and that's limiting convection on the western side. So due to the fact that the lower level winds are just a little bit too strong, that's going to inhibit this storm to the point where it should eventually weaken once this approaches further the western portion of the Caribbean, where the storm just moves a little bit too fast to keep up, and the energy is too displaced from the center of circulation for there to be enough wind speed around the center of circulation for this to still be considered a tropical storm. So that's certainly good news that it's expected to dissipate. But for the Lesser Antilles and even portions of the Caribbean islands, you still should expect enhanced rainfall from this tropical cyclone, because the rainfall, of course, will move far to the northeast from the center of circulation. So Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, as well as Haiti, you still should experience impacts primarily when it comes to heavy rainfall. So definitely pay close attention to that. But of course, the worst of the impact should be located right over the Lesser Antilles, where you should expect heavy rainfall, the possibility of flash flooding, as well as very powerful winds. And moving on to Invest 93L, we do see that Invest 93L, based on what the GFS model is stating, is expecting to peak in intensity relatively early before it eventually weakens. And it's going to weaken primarily due to the same result as what will dissipate Tropical Storm Bret, which is the fact that the lower level winds are just too strong. So it's going to displace the center of circulation away from the moisture, which means it'll displace the primary area where the energy is supposed to spiral around away from the center of circulation. So that will definitely weaken the storm as it continues ahead further northwestward. And although the upper level winds will be relatively light over these two disturbances, the lower level winds are just going to be too strong. Let me show you guys how the wind speed will change between the different levels of the atmosphere. And we do see the lower level winds are much stronger than the upper level winds. So we're definitely going to see that displacement between the center of circulation as well as the convective activity. We also see that the European model is forecasting a very similar scenario for these two storms, where they primarily stay possibly mid-level to strong tropical storms before eventually weakening and dissipating due to the fact that the lower level winds are just too strong. So some may be wondering where these next two tropical cyclones will move towards. So let's first take a look at the steering flow that will be over these two disturbances. So we have this big ridge that's going to steer Bret all the way to the west and towards the Lesser Antilles. So the only way this could potentially move northward into Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic is if we see this low pressure system completely erode this ridge to where it'll have an open area to move further northward. But that's unlikely at this point. The computer models have been very confident that this ridge will stay over the Caribbean islands, so that will spare Puerto Rico and Hispaniola from the worst impacts, but for the Lesser Antilles, you need to pay very close attention to powerful impacts when it comes to tropical storm force winds, as well as the potential flash flooding. And in terms of Invest 93L, it's going to be a little more interesting. We see that the main steering flow will be this ridge, and really the only way this could move further westward to the point where it could bring more impacts to the Caribbean islands is if this ridge ends up being more powerful than anticipated. And while that is a possibility, I don't think we're going to see this ridge become so much more powerful to a point where this would steer this Invest 93L towards the Caribbean to bring any direct impacts. At worst, most likely you guys will experience a brushing from this, which still could be in fact impactful. You still could experience heavy rain from this and gusty winds, just not as impactful, of course, as a landfall, which is certainly good news, but you still want to be aware of Invest 93L because we still have some Ensemble members wanting to take this a little bit further westward, which would be a major concern. We're just going to need to see how strong this ridge will be by the time we approach this weekend to determine if this could move further westward to bring more impacts, or will it primarily stay out to sea. Most likely, it'll stay out to sea at this point. Here are what the Ensemble members are stating when it comes to Tropical Storm Bret. We do see that there's a high amount of agreement that this will primarily move straight towards the west. We do have this one H-Wharf Ensemble member wanting to take this towards the Dominican Republic, but the most likely scenario, of course, since most of the computer models are in good agreement, is that this should primarily move directly to the west, with this ridge being very strong to be able to divert this storm from moving northward and primarily towards the west. So that should be good news for the Caribbean islands, but that could bring enhanced rainfall for Central America. So you might want to pay close attention to this right up along the Central American coast by next week. Taking a look at what the Ensemble members are stating when it comes to the forecasted strength, we do see that most of them agree that this should stay at tropical storm status, and most of them pretty much only weaken the storm from here, which would certainly be good news, and hopefully this will be the case. And I think it most likely will be the case. Maybe it could increase its wind speed by 5 to 10 miles per hour before it takes a steep decline once it approaches the Caribbean, once the energy becomes a little bit too dispersed for the storm to maintain its strength. And here are what the Ensemble members are stating when it comes to Invest 93L, or what will likely become Tropical Storm Cindy. This is a little bit more concerning. It does bring the storm closer to the Caribbean islands, including Puerto Rico. However, still, most of them do agree that this should move just to the north of the islands, and hopefully that is the case. We're just going to need to see how strong this ridge is to determine how far west we're going to see this storm move, but hopefully it's able to move further northward, and we see a small trough that's able to erode this ridge and create more of an open area to where it could avoid the Caribbean islands. And here's a model intensity guidance for Invest 93L. Most of them do agree that this should at least strengthen into a tropical storm. We do have some of the later computer model runs wanting to take this to hurricane status, but for the most part, most agree that it's going to be a tropical storm, and it will likely remain as a tropical storm as its peak intensity, as I don't think it's going to be over favorable conditions for that long for this to be able to strengthen into a Category 1 hurricane. So this is my current forecast when it comes to these two tropical disturbances. So in terms of the possibility that Tropical Storm Bret does strengthen into a hurricane and impacts the Lesser Antilles as a hurricane, I will say it's definitely the least likely scenario. The most likely scenario is that this will say around a strong tropical storm. There is that slight possibility it could strengthen into a hurricane, but I don't think it's going to be able to. I don't think the center of circulation will be able to stay symmetric enough for all that energy to spiral around it and enhance the winds to a point where it could become hurricane status. So, but still, for Lesser Antilles, you need to pay very close attention to this. Still expect gusty winds, whether there's a tropical storm or hurricane. The impacts won't change much. You still should expect very heavy rainfall, and this should continue on up until Saturday before I'll say it dissipates by the time it approaches the longitude of Jamaica. And for Tropical Storm Cindy, it's likely to form at this point, and the Caribbean islands, especially further northwest eastward, you need to pay close attention to the possibility that Tropical Storm Cindy could brush you guys, since some of the Ensemble members do take it somewhat close to those islands. But I thank you guys for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more content.